January 1st seems to be the natural beginning of the year to us now. But what if I told you there was a time when January didn't even exist, and the new year actually began in March? And does Sept from September and Oct from October sound like 7 and 8 to you? That's because they were the 7th and 8th months in a calendar that ended with December as the 10th. So what changed? How did we end up with a calendar that starts with January 1st and has December as the 12th month and not 10th? Let's talk about the strange history of our calendar. The need for a calendar began the moment humans moved from hunting and gathering to farming. When people began planting crops, they had to track the passing of seasons, the rains, the cold, the harvest, and so on. That's when time suddenly became something you had to measure, not just experience. Naturally, calendars developed in different parts of the world according to local seasons and traditions. The Hindu calendar begins its year in March, near the spring equinox. The Babylonian year also opened in spring, with the first visible crescent moon. The Chinese calendar began right at the tail end of winter, on the second new moon after the winter solstice. And the early Roman calendar, on which our current modern calendar is based, also began in March, right when agricultural activity returned to life. It all made perfect sense. Spring represented renewal, planting, and the beginning of work. It was a perfect way to start the year. So how did we end up with the new year starting in the freezing cold January? A time that matches no seasonal cycle, no agricultural pattern, and no major solar event. To understand that, we have to go back to early Rome, where the calendar was once a complete mess. The calendar we use today is the Gregorian calendar, which is a refined version of the Julian calendar, named after Julius Caesar. But those calendars were built on something far older, the legendary Roman calendar. Dating back to the time of Romulus, the mythical first king of Rome, it had only 10 months and 304 days. The year began in March and ended in December. The months of winter, approximately 60 days, weren't counted at all. They were just a blank, nameless stretch of cold where nothing of value happened, so the Romans simply ignored it. This is why months like September, October, November, and December still carry names sounding like 7, 8, 9, and 10. When Rome's second king, Numa Pompilius, took over, he didn't want the year to begin with March, which was named after Mars, the god of war. So he added 2 new months, January and February, to the calendar, with January named after Janus, the two-faced god of beginnings. With this reform, the calendar now had 12 fixed months, 355 days, and an optional intercalary month. This intercalary month wasn't part of every year, but was inserted every other year to keep the seasons aligned and averaged the year out to 365 days. And that's where everything began to spiral out of control. The priests in charge of managing the calendar were political appointees, which meant the calendar itself became a political weapon. Adding or skipping the extra month could lengthen or shorten a magistrate's term, influence legal deadlines, or manipulate elections. Intercalation was no longer used to fix the calendar, it was used to benefit allies. By the time Julius Caesar rose to power, the Roman calendar had drifted almost 90 days out of sync. Spring festivals were now being celebrated in July. Farmers were confused about when to sow. Even officials weren't entirely sure what day it actually was. Caesar had had enough. In 46 BC, he introduced the Julian calendar. He abolished the intercalary month, created the leap year system, and aligned the calendar with the solar year, 365.25 days. For the first time in generations, the Roman world had a stable calendar. But having a calendar is one thing. Deciding when the year actually begins is another entirely. Even though the calendar started with January since the time of Numa, the Roman civil year began on the 15th of March, when newly elected consuls took office. In the end, January 1st became the new year not through logic or tradition, but because of a military crisis in Rome. For a long time in Rome, the political year began on the 15th of March, because that was the day the newly elected consuls, Rome's highest officials, formally took charge. But in 153 BC, everything changed. Rome was facing a sudden military crisis in Hispania. The tribes had launched a fresh uprising, and the Senate urgently needed the newly elected consuls to take command of the legions. They couldn't wait until March. Rome needed leadership immediately. So the Senate made a drastic decision. Consuls would take office on the 1st of January instead of the 15th of March. From that moment on, January 1st became the default beginning of the administrative year. Centuries later, Caesar's reforms further solidified January 1st as the start of the new year. But ancient societies 2,000 years ago didn't think of New Year's Day the way we do now. People observed and celebrated new moons, solstices, and equinoxes. But celebrating a specific day without a solar or lunar marker didn't make sense back then, especially one in the middle of the dead winter. Common people didn't even have access to calendars until much later, when the printing press was invented. The calendar was maintained by selected priests, who, more often than not, were not entirely sure of the workings themselves. Anyway, the Julian calendar endured for centuries, but after Caesar's assassination, the priests responsible for maintaining the leap year miscalculated and began either inserting leap years too frequently or skipping them for decades at a time. The calendar began to drift once again. Emperor Augustus corrected the drift, yet the problem wasn't entirely solved. Because the year isn't exactly 365.25 days, it's about 11 minutes short. Those 11 minutes, along with errors caused by leap years, kept adding up year after year, centuries after centuries, until by the 1500s, the date of Easter had shifted by months. This concerned Pope Gregory XIII, who then commissioned a major correction, and in 1582 introduced the Gregorian calendar. His reform refines the leap year rule, realigns the seasons, and most importantly, reaffirmed January 1st as the official start of the year. Catholic countries adopted the new calendar immediately. Others took their time. Some took centuries. England didn't switch until 1752, and Greece became the last European country to adopt it in 1923. And that's how a year that once began in spring, in harmony with nature, shifted to the freezing cold January. It wasn't astronomy or agriculture that made the change. It was politics, religion, emergencies, reforms, mistakes, and centuries of trial and error. Yet somehow, through all of that chaos, we ended up with the modern calendar that now governs everything, from your birthday to the global New Year's countdown. If this story made you rethink something as ordinary as a calendar, leave us a like and your thoughts in the comments. And if you haven't, subscribe to our channel for more such interesting stories from our past. And as always, thanks for watching.